We hear the news in the background, so if people can just mute.
Yes. The YouTube live stream has started, but yeah, it does sort of sound like someone's listening to national news. So, yeah. So yeah, you can start whenever you're ready, Reshma.
Okay. Welcome to the January 11th meeting of the CB6 Budget and Governmental Affairs Committee. My name is Reshma Patel, and I'm the vice chair of this committee. I am chairing tonight's meeting in the absence of our committee chair, Rick Eggers. This meeting is called to order at 6:32 p.m. tonight. We are joined by community associate Brendan Berth. Members of the public, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. If there is a time following the committee's discussion, we will field questions from the public. Brian Van Nieuwenhuizen has volunteered to take minutes tonight. Thank you, Brian. People who haven't signed up yet to take minutes, please fill out the doodle poll for minutes taking this year. Brendan will post a link to the doodle poll in the chat right now. We will now take attendance by roll call. Brendan will conduct the roll call.
Okay, so just a moment. Committee members, I will call your name and you will unmute yourselves. When your name is called, please say present. I will announce if there is quorum. Rick is not here. Reshma Patel.
Here.
Jim Collins.
Here.
E. Disman.
Here.
Paige Judge. Paige Judge.
Here.
Brian Van Nieuwenhoven.
Present.
Claudel Winfield.
Present.
Eva Marie Lassiter.
Present. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. And Karen Moore.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you, Brendan. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and is reflected on the screen before you. If there is no objection, we will adopt the agenda. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, you may raise your hand through Zoom right now. Okay, so hearing no objections, the agenda for tonight is adopted.
Until the end.
Okay, does anybody have a comment? No. The minutes from the November 9th meeting of the Budget and Governmental Affairs Committee were distributed ahead of time by the board office. If there's no objection, we will adopt the minutes as drafted. Just adopting the minutes, you may raise your hand through Zoom. Seeing no objections, the minutes from the November 9th meeting are adopted. They will soon be available on the CB6 website. In order to conduct an efficient meeting, let's observe a few ground rules.
Yeah, I spoke to her today. I spoke to her
If you aren't
yesterday.
speaking, if you can mute your microphones.
Yeah.
Thank you. No one can speak until granted the floor. Committee members, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. If you click the participants icon, the participants panel should appear, and you should find the raise hand function there. If you still have technical difficulty, you may click the chat icon and relay your difficulty. The chat function should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat should only be used to alert us of any technical difficulties you are having or state in writing information like an email address that was already stated aloud on the record during the meeting. When a committee member is given the floor to speak, I will identify you and you can unmute yourself so that you can speak. We are required by executive order to create a verbatim transcript of this meeting. So please keep your questions and comments succinct and germane to the discussion. The order of the adopted agenda should be followed. Tonight's agenda, we will be discussing voter services and electoral reforms. Then the chair's report, and then any and old and new business that we may have. After the committee's discussion of each agenda item, but before the Q&A period with the public begins, repeat the ground rules. The ground rules will be repeated again. We will now take a vote by roll call. When your name is called for your vote, you may unmute yourself and answer yay, nay, or abstain, or not.
Wait, no vote yet. There's no resolution.
Oh, okay, sorry.
The votes are only, the section on voting is only for resolutions.
Oh, okay.
That being said, if there is a resolution that comes out of the discussion tonight, then there will need to be a vote.
Okay, sorry about that. So then we can just begin with tonight's agenda. So we have 3 speakers tonight. We have Kate Duran from the League of Women Voters of New York City. She is a board member of the New York State League of Women Voters, as well as the election specialist for the City League. And she will talk about some of the recommendations that the League would have for the city to improve voting in this upcoming election, and tell us about any changes that they would want at the state level. Kate?
Okay, you ready for me?
Yes, thank you.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. We are very, very interested in voter service and election and voting reform. It's really our bread and butter. And the first thing I'd like to say is I'm delighted to see Tiffany Townsend. She may remember that I'm typically in the first row at the commissioners' meetings. I follow the board.
Absolutely. Happy New Year. It's good to see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm hoping that maybe in 2021 we can get back to being there in person. I'm also, I've been a poll worker since 2004 and a poll site coordinator I have been for 12 years or so. So I have operational experience that I think gives me a little standing when I'm speaking about what I think will work and what might not work. So I'm sure most of you know, election state law. We in the City League of Women Voters, we support the state league's legislative agenda, and we recommend at the city level what we think would make a difference. Ranked choice voting that's coming to New York City on February 2nd is sort of an exception to that rule about state law, because the city charter was amended in 2019 by the will of the voters, and we will now have ranked choice voting for citywide elections, as city council, only in the primaries, however, not in the general elections. And so we at the League of Women Voters are very excited to support that. Brandon, you could show that first slide, I think, that I've got there too.
Sure.
Okay. All right. You can move to the next one. That's sort of redundant to what Reshma did. Okay, so the next thing I want to tell you about, so that you can write it down if you care to, are the relevant websites. And I will, another plug and for the New York City Board of Elections. The New York City Board of Elections, you could go to the next website, or pardon me, the next slide, Brandon. Yes. The New York City Board of Elections website, I have down there number 3, but I must tell you that when I first started to watch the Board of Elections, the website was really obscure, and it was only useful if you were a candidate with a really wonky question about the calendar, perhaps. But now it really, really does serve voters, and we are excited about that. And I would encourage anybody who's listening tonight to go to that website and make recommendations. If you can't find things, if it's difficult to navigate, let them know, because they've been very, very responsive over the last few years. And of course, at the top of my list there is our website. Go there, please. Join us if you think that we're doing good work. And the League of Women Voters of New York State will have our legislative agenda up. If anybody was listening today, there was a very quick meeting of the Senate Election Law Committee, and they moved about a half a dozen marvelous new voting reform agenda items into the Rules Committee. The package was mostly related to absentee voting and counting of absentee votes and that sort of thing. And that's of great interest to everyone, given what we went through last year. And if you're interested in seeing the nuts and bolts of how ranked choice voting is going to work, you should go to the Campaign Finance Board website, because the charter mandates that the Campaign Finance Board educate the public. The New York City Board of Elections is going to implement ranked choice voting, but the Campaign Finance Board is in charge of educating. So if we could move to the next one, Brandon. All right, there are 2 bills here that relate specifically to New York City voting reforms. The first one is online voter registration for New York City. This would allow New York voters to register online. And we are eventually going to have online voter registration, but not for several years throughout the state of New York. But the Campaign Finance Board built an online registration system that was meant to go live in 2019. The New York City Board commissioners objected to it, and activists like the League of Women Voters got together with other activists, and a bill was drafted, and there it is for you. It would sunset when the statewide bill goes into effect. But if you care about online voter registration in New York City, particularly in this year when we are going to have so many important elections, I would urge you to write to your senators and assembly members. Now, these are the 2020 bill numbers, but anybody will be able to find them. And once they're introduced again, they'll get new numbers. Myri is the Senate sponsor. The Assembly sponsor was Michael Blake, but he has left the Assembly, so there's going to have to be a new sponsor. Now, the second key bill was introduced by Senator Krueger very recently, and it's specific to reforming the New York City Board of Elections. And maybe Commissioner Townsend has some opinions about this, but we in the League are supporting it, and the State League is supporting it, although we have many, many recommendations for how it could be improved, and we really want to see ultimately a statewide reform of the Board of Elections. So, but that's a very important one to take a look at if that's your area of interest, and you could certainly make recommendations to your particular senator and assembly member about how what you'd like to see happen. So I think, Brandon, the last thing. Okay. I can't say this too often. Election law is state law. We are extremely lucky in New York City in that.
Hi, I'm actually on a Zoom call, so I'm going to put you on mute because I'm on a Zoom call. Great.
If anybody who is not speaking, if you could just mute your microphones, please. Thank you.
Yeah. So
sorry, I'm on a.
Should I continue? This is the coda. This is the end. It needs to be emphasized that election law is state law, and if we really want to see changes, we need to be make ourselves known to our assembly members and our senators. And you can find the names of those people at the League of Women Voters website. But stay tuned. Lots and lots of things are going to be happening. And I believe today also, the second passage of same-day voter registration and no excuse absentee voting was passed, and those require constitutional amendment, and this is part of the whole process. And the voters will see those changes on the ballot in November. Very exciting year for voting. We thought last year was exciting, but stay tuned, everyone.
All right. Thank you so much, Kate. And so committee members, the purpose of tonight, we are the Budget and Government Affairs Committee, and, we haven't focused as much on government affairs, but Rick Eggers, our chair, this year would like to move in a direction where we do more of government affairs. And the point of tonight is to see what we can take from what we hear and what resolutions we'd want to write to advocate for these reforms. And if you have any further questions for Kate, please raise your hand in the Zoom function.
Yeah, I see that Jim Collins has raised his hand.
All right, I give the floor to Jim Collins.
Hi, I was curious. I saw that the legislation, at least the way you summarized it, applied only to online registration in New York City. I'm wondering why it's not statewide.
Because there is an online registration initiative being built in New York State. That is ongoing, but it could take several years to roll out. The problem was that the charter, the city council commanded the campaign finance board to build an online voter registration system. Nobody remembers this, but they did their job. They were given, I think, 18 months to do it. They did a fine job. They rolled it out in 2019. They brought it to the commissioners. I don't know whether Commissioner Townsend was serving on the board at that time. She may have been, but I was sitting there, and Amanda Malillo from the Campaign Finance Board demonstrated the whole process to the commissioners, and they refused it. They would not accept it. Their objection came down to the signature function. You know, in New York State, voters are identified only by their signature. You don't have voter ID laws in New York State. You don't have to produce an identification. There's no fingerprinting or photographs of voters. You come in and you sign your name. So when you register to vote, that signature is pretty much the most important thing on the form. And the commissioners of elections in New York City did not like the way that the campaign finance board was capturing an electronic signature. So they said, no, no, no. And then this bill was written to try to get around that issue. And if the senators and the assembly members will pass it, we could have instantly, it would come effective immediately. We would have online voter registration for New York City. And this is a big year, so we'd really like to see it. I'm sure most
and presumably the signature issue has been resolved.
Well, it would be it's resolved to the satisfaction of the assembly members and the senators and the state. I've heard the commissioners and the executive management at the Board of Elections say many, many times, we are a ministerial agency. You guys write the laws, and we will comply. We will follow.
The other question is with respect to the existing voters. My understanding is that the only verification of existing voter files is basically a mail function. The city mails things to the address of voters listed at their address, and if the mail comes back, moved or whatever, they are presumed to have been, no longer valid at that address, and they're removed from the rolls. Is that correct?
No, well, their voters aren't purged. They're put on an inactive list. And if they show up, if something strange happened, for some reason they didn't get their mail, or their mother or dad threw it away and they were off at college or something, all they have to do is show up at their poll site and fill out an affidavit ballot. And then immediately they're going to be back on the active rolls of voters. So that they don't purge voters. The New York State election law does protect voters in that way. I know you all might be thinking about what happened in Brooklyn many years ago, but we believe that was an error made by people who really didn't understand what they were meant to be doing. We don't think there was any deliberate malfeasance there.
I'm surprised that they don't purge voters, given the frequent changes of addresses among, particularly here in Manhattan, that they don't purge voters. I mean, the Postal Service has a database,
right,
of changes of address.
Yes.
And also, obviously, the census and Social Security have
Sure.
access to dead voters,
Right.
And
No.
and I would think that all of that would want to be put into a database and compared to the data on the voter rolls to ensure the integrity of the votes.
They do that, and I'm going to put a plug in for our new electronic poll books, which I really, really like. The electronic poll books is a vast data storage box, and now it has the files of inactive voters. When we were checking in voters at poll sites, I mentioned that I've been a poll worker for a long time. When we checked in voters on the paper registration books, which you all may remember,
Right, sure.
There were only the names of the active voters. Those voters the Board of Elections believed were active at that point in time. And if your name was not on that list, then the poll worker would hand you an affidavit ballot. But now we have in that electronic poll book, we have records of voters that are inactive, and we can turn that screen around and show it to the voter and say, look, we just, maybe you moved or something, but we have you here, you're registered, but you've been inactive.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it's a complicated issue. I would say study it further, Mr. Collins, if you care to, and make some recommendations to the board.
No, I just think that, I would just go with the USPS database and do a purge that way.
Well, they look at it, but as I say, they put the voters in an inactive file, and then after a certain period of time, and they do purge.
I also see that B. Disman has raised her hand.
Yes, thank you. I do want to ask you a question about signatures. A lot of agencies, state and federal, are going to electronic signatures.
Right.
And there's an authentication aspect that's built in on that. Is that what the bill contains, or there's some thoughts of that in the development, either on the state or city level?
I don't know, Ms. Disman. There may be at the state level, but I'm honestly not familiar with an electronic authentication process.
Okay. A lot of government agencies are using that, and the courts are using that as well. So it will be within the next 3 to 5 years standard practice.
Well, I'm going to make a note and look into it and see if that's being built into the statewide bill.
Yeah, and I would say it's not to my knowledge, but I think it's also worth a mention to electeds in terms of building that into the language.
Yeah.
So it's called electronic signature verification.
Yeah,
it's electronic
DocuSign is an example.
It's DocuSign. There is a number of commercial products that are used, but there's also an authentication piece that comes with it. So in case of, instead of a signature, there are some data matches that you do to authenticate that's the person that you're talking about.
Right. Well, I can tell you something interesting about the electronic poll book. As I say, I like it. I like it better than the paper book. And when the voter comes in and they sign, sometimes the signature is very, very tiny on that. They use a stylus to sign right in the electronic poll book. And if you voted in person this past November, you'll remember that. And we're allowed now to turn that around and show it to the voter and say, and then show them the exemplar signature that the board has on file. And we say, this doesn't look exactly, can you see what record we had? And sometimes they'll say, oh, that's my real signature. I just gave you my debit card signature, and they'll do it over again for us. And I like that. I think that's a service to voters. I think it shows them that we're we're acknowledging, what's going on in the world. And we're seeing, they see what, and it is hard to sign with a stylus, but they see what we can capture and what we have on record. It doesn't answer your question, but I'm just giving you an anecdotal thing. But I'm just trying to explain how we're trying to serve the voters.
Are there any more questions? If so, please raise your hand in the Zoom function. All right. Seeing that there are no more questions from the committee. Thank you. Are there any public questions, Brendan?
I do not see any.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you, Kate, for speaking with us tonight and giving us your recommendations. Thank you. And our next speaker is Tiffany Townsend from the Board of Elections. She is the Manhattan Democratic Commissioner for the Board of Elections, and as Kate had mentioned her several times, so we'll hear from her now.
Hi, can everyone hear me? I apologize for any background noise. And I just want to actually say first a huge thanks to Kate, because well, when we did meet in person, we would see each other on basically a weekly basis. And she gave you guys just a lot of really good information. And we, in general, are just really appreciative of the work of her organization in helping to educate the voting public. I think, I agree with her in the sense that it is, I'll say a couple of things. One is, now that I've been a commissioner for about 2 years, I have a very different appreciation for a number of things. One of which is what Kate had mentioned several times, is that the Board of Elections, the City Board of Elections, is governed by state law. And I was always, the type of person, well, why don't we just do this? Or why doesn't this just happen? But understanding that we're guided by state law and state statute, and there's very, very clear language in terms of what we can and cannot do, and how we're, and how we can behave. And it is our job as a ministerial agency to follow the law and to run our elections along the guidelines of, of the law. So understanding that, and also I would say that it is actually, I think, an exciting time for New York City in terms of voting. And, just over the last couple of years, as everyone, I'm sure on this call, will remember, we enacted early voting in 2019 for the first time, adding, 10 days, essentially. Now we now have 10 days in which New Yorkers can vote. And to me, it means that that voting is more accessible than it's ever been. So we had early voting for the first time. We were able to have it and sort of have it test run in time for the general election in the fall, which I think was extremely important. I think part of the reason why things did overall go quite well. And then we had, with the pandemic, we expanded absentee ballot and absentee voting for the voting public, again, expanding the ways in which people can exercise their right to vote. And now going into this year, we're going to have ranked choice voting for the first time come summer. And now just today, with the governor's reforms that he's announced, which include expanding access to early voting hours, something that the commissioners, we actually did on our own, of expanding early voting hours from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. on the weekends, as well as on the minimum of 3 weekdays during the 10-day early voting period. No excuse absentee voting for the state, allowing more time for voters to request absentee ballots, also speeding up the counting of absentee ballots. What I think many folks may not realize is that there's a designated time frame right now in which the board can actually count its ballots, and it does not start until after after election day, which is the reason why some races take several weeks for us to know the actual outcome and to be able to certify what those elections are. And so just, speaking for me as the Manhattan Democratic Commissioner, I welcome all of these reforms and anything that we can do to make voting easier for the public. Working with the team at the Manhattan office, both at the Manhattan and the general office, we, refined a lot of things, sort of, I'll call it in our customer service work in terms of having a new website that has much better information. It just has a better overall user experience. And as Kate had mentioned previously, it was really, if you were a candidate and you kind of knew what you were looking for, the website probably serves you just fine. But for the general person who really just wants to know, where is my polling site? Am I registered to vote? If not, how do I do that? I think that our new site really delivers on that experience, and we're always trying to do better and to upgrade it. What you'll find now on the website is actually the newest information around ranked choice voting. And Brendan, I don't know if you got the link. I would love to be able to share with you guys the video that the board has put together for ranked choice voting as part of our overall education campaign. And as Kate also mentioned, the Campaign Finance Board is actually responsible, and it's enshrined in the city charter that they are responsible for the public education campaign to make sure voters understand how ranked choice voting will work. However, we are also running our own campaign to really complement that. So Brandon, I'm not sure if you let me know if you received the link. If not, I won't worry about that.
This is it, correct?
There we go. Yes, that is it.
Okay, now I do give a warning. At times, video sharing can be a bit choppy with Zoom, but hopefully this will work out. So start the video.
Great.
Should I start the video?
Oh, yes, please.
Hey NYC voters, there's a new way to vote for your city officials in 2021. The City of New York will use the ranked choice voting method for all NYC primaries and special elections for mayor, public advocate, comptroller, borough president, and city council. Ranked choice voting gives New York voters more choice than ever before. Rather than choosing just one candidate, now you have the option to rank up to 5 of your favorite candidates. Here's how it works. Mark your ballot by order of preference, ranking as many or as few candidates as you like. In the first column, fill in the oval next to your first choice candidate, your second choice in the second column, followed by your third, fourth, and fifth choice. At the close of Election Day, all first choice votes are counted. The candidate to receive over 50% of votes wins. If no candidate receives over 50% of the first choice votes, the race moves to round 2. The person with the least number of votes is eliminated. If your first choice candidate does not win and they're eliminated, we then count your second choice vote and add it to the candidate's total. This process continues until we have a winner. Go to vote.nyc to learn more about NYC ranked choice voting and upcoming elections.
Thank you. So that is just a preview of part of the education campaign that we put together that we'll be rolling out in the next couple of weeks. Actually, there is a special election in the Bronx. So that will be our first pass at, seeing how this all rolls out, and we'll continue to sort of refine and tweak, but that is the direction that we'll be headed. So we're actually very excited about the work that's been done. And I think that, I definitely commend the communications team, even though it's a very tiny team that's at the Board of Elections, who's been working on these and understands the need for these types of explainer videos and really making very, very simple, clear information and being available across a lot of platforms, whether it's Twitter and Facebook, et cetera, to try to reach people and to meet them where they are so they can get the information that they need. I'm actually going to stop there because I think Kate actually covered a ton of stuff, which I totally appreciate, and I'm happy to take any questions. I think I see a hand raised.
Yes. Looks like Eva Marie has raised her hand.
Yes, I just wanted to, if it could be clarified that the tiers of votes with the first choice, if it's not 50%, then it goes to the second choice. Is that to prevent the enormous cost in having runoff elections? Is that one of the reasons that the tier program has been initiated?
That is one of the benefits of ranked choice voting. Yes, it would prevent the need for additional election events, as we would call them. And yes, and it would definitely reduce the overall cost of what the board spends annually to conduct elections.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I see that B. Disman has raised her hand.
Yes, thank you. I just have one question. As your ballot is in many languages, will your video be in other languages other than English?
Right now, I think it's only in English, but I actually have to double check with Val. Oftentimes, we have, I think it's 6 languages that we're legally required to do. And to the extent that we have the resources to translate everything, then we will always try to do that. But I'm actually not 100% sure if that particular explainer video is going to definitely be in all of the other languages. And just to keep in mind that video, there will also be shorter versions, which are also obviously easier to translate, that will be made available. And our other materials, whether print or other digital materials, will also be translated.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I also see that Claude has his hand raised. You're on mute, Claude. Okay, Claude, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay. What I was saying was, I don't know if it's pertinent to the discussion that we've been having, but either one can answer it if you know. Given the COVID situation that we have that's going on and the upcoming elections and the candidates seeking to be on the ballot, what is the position with the petitioning that has to take place? Because that involves a lot of interaction out in the public.
That's a great question, Claude. As of right now, nothing has changed, but the governor could act to sign an executive order, as he did with the pandemic last go around with petitioning, where the number of signatures was brought down. So there potentially, there's obviously a number of forms that could take in terms of what might be authorized or what might be changed. But yes, it is a possibility that there could be a change to the petitioning for this year due to the pandemic, but the governor could issue an executive order around that.
A side question. If that's done, do you think that would increase the number of candidates, thereby affecting the rank order?
You know what? You know what? Honestly, I don't know. I think the way I think of it is like, look, it's the first time we're doing it. It's a baseline year. I kind of thought the same thing around early voting as well. We'll see how this works, and we have to start someplace. I apologize. That's my child crying's background noise.
Nice to
but
hear.
So you know, I think it remains to be seen. But it will be interesting to see, you know, what the outcome of all of that is. But I don't think we know just yet.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Claude.
I also see that Jim has his hand raised, Jim Collins.
Yeah, this is actually directed at Ms. Doran. The League of Women Voters usually sponsors the debates, as I recollect. And you've always chosen to use the Spectrum New York 1 channel for doing that. Now, I'm a Verizon subscriber, and I know that they stream it live, but I would think, I've always thought that there's been a bit of a conflict there between the questioner, the person that runs the debate, simply because the franchise is granted by the state of New York. And I'm just wondering if, you know, New York City has its own TV channels. The broadcast channels like ABC, NBC, CBS, are open and available to everybody, even if you don't have cable service. I'm just wondering if next year or this cycle, which is, I think, a very important cycle for all New Yorkers, if you would consider using a different, more widely available network, particularly a broadcast network.
Yeah. I'm going to take that back to our board, Mr. Collins. I'm not involved in the debate sponsoring, but I know that we're partnering with ABC this year. So does that satisfy you? Does that make you a little
if they're doing it on ABC, that's fine. That's much more appropriate than New York One.
And I thank you very much for bringing this up, because, you know, we have a sterling reputation for nonpartisanship. And back in the 60s and the 70s, the League of Women Voters moderated the presidential debates.
No, I remember. I remember it well.
How wonderful. Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So,
it's just Spectrum has its own agenda, in my view, and you know, it tends to be very deferential to the state and to maintain their franchise.
Well, thank you for telling me that. Yeah. I have a question actually for Commissioner Townsend, if this is an appropriate time. I love the video. And I've seen other videos created.
I will tell Val.
yes. No, tell Val hi and Miss Val. Is there any chance, I recommended this when I testified before the city council, but is there any chance that there could be a video, or rather a laptop set up in the poll site so the voters could go and look at that? Because this is a complicated process, and I think that it would delay things, and I think it's going to be confusing for voters, and to ask the poll workers to explain it, I think is like a bridge.
Oh, do you mean like a laptop setup or some sort of kiosk setup at the poll site during ranked choice voting?
Exactly.
It hasn't come to my knowledge. It hasn't come to me specifically. I don't know if the question's been posed to any of the other commissioners. I'm all for more education. I think the challenge for us would be, how do you implement it? It's one thing to do it during early voting where we have fewer number of sites, but then how would you implement that level of education for people who decide that they want to vote only on election day, you know, which they are free to do? I think that would be the biggest challenge, is a matter of scale.
No, I understand that completely. Yeah. That's why I was suggesting for these couple specials that are coming up, which there are not going to be very many poll sites.
Okay.
And then you could see how it works, and if it's too complicated. But I really think that those kind of videos are going to be very welcome.
Yeah, I think the explainer videos have helped tremendously. It's an interesting question. No, you're as far as I know, at least you're the first person who's asked me that question. I don't know if it's been posed to the other commissioners, but being that I'm also the chair of the Public Education Committee, I'm all for the more education, the better.
Yeah. I think that that the poll worker, and again, I'm a poll worker, so if I I won't be working at these specials, but a poll worker could say, if you really want to have a better understanding of it, you can go over there and watch that little video.
And I will say the one thing that I would like to see more of that really worked during the general for us was the line managers, which was a new position during the general. And as you guys might remember, you may have seen when you went to go vote, people who were just basically walking the line and telling you that, maybe if you had your absentee ballot already filled out and you were just dropping it off, that you could cut the line, things of that nature. I think that really helped, especially with the general where we had such enormous turnout, just to help manage people's expectations about how long they might be waiting in line, and to make sure that people who didn't need to wait in line because they already had their ballot ready to drop off also didn't need to wait on line for no reason. So I think that is so again something that I think it's worth being open to.
Well, thank you. We applaud all of the voter service initiatives.
Thank you. I love it too. So I'm like, people always ask me, what else can we do? Call your state legislature and keep that conversation going about what reforms we can continue to make in Albany that will help guide the voting experience here in New York.
Thank you, Tiffany. I actually want to add to Kate's, suggestion, right? Maybe something you can do is if we can do one of those QR codes where people come in and they can scan it on their phone and they take them directly to a website with the video on election day or voting, and that might be easier than having a computer which someone has to man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a great idea.
Yeah, and I thought the line managers were excellent. I mean, the general election, I was monitoring several different sites around the city, and they did such a good job, and it was super efficient. So
Yeah.
if they could help in this way with like even giving people the QR code to scan before they even go in. So
Yeah,
that would be a good option.
cool. Appreciated.
And then another question I had is, some of the complaints that I got, which, you were so patient with me because I was forwarding every friend's email to you. And when the complaints came, some people had issues with dropping off their ballots and then it not being able to track them and not knowing, if they were received by the Board of Elections. So has there been anything done to kind of do better tracking with mail-in? And then the other issue that several people had complained about during the primaries that they had gone online and said they changed their registration, but when they went to vote in the primary, their names weren't there, so they filled out a provisional ballot, and then they got a letter in the mail several months later saying that their vote had not actually been accepted.
I think, I'm sorry for the noise. I think that that's something that we can always do better on is now that we've had the portal for more than one cycle, I think that now it's much more battle tested. I think that there's ways that we can definitely improve in terms of the process by which we sort of batch everything, put it through the system, and then it gets uploaded. Because there certainly were cases of that, and certainly that's, I don't find that acceptable, but it's part of the process of like what refinements do we continue to make the process better, clearer, easier to understand.
Thank you.
I can say also that one of the bills that came out of the Senate, New York State Senate Election Law Committee today was a ballot tracking bill. And I didn't read the bill yet, but I think that it's pretty simple and straightforward. And it went out of the Senate Election Law Committee to the Rules Committee. So they're going to be the state of New York is going to be tracking ballots, not just the city.
Oh, that's great news, Kate. Thank you for telling us that.
Yeah.
So any questions from the public?
I do not see any.
I don't see any more raised hands, but if anyone else from the committee has a question or a comment, let us know. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next speaker. Okay, so our next speaker is Wilfredo Lopez, and he works for Council Member Ben Kalos's office. He's the legislative director there. And, they have a working group that's been working on improving and increasing the number of poll sites in our district, especially the early voting sites. And so I'll turn it over to Wilfredo.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you so much for the presenters. Kate, Tiffany, you're literally giving a masterclass on these issues, so I really appreciate it. So Councilmember Kalos, in conjunction with the Borough President's office, Gail Brewer, have been working on putting together a task force or working group. We're not tied to any one name as of yet, to help identify additional polling sites across the city, specifically for early voting purposes. This kind of stemmed from some of the issues that happened in the northern side of Councilmember Kalos's district, where Robert F. Wagner was the early voting site and experienced very long lines and long wait times during the November general election. Which, to the credit of the Board of Elections, they managed those lines as efficiently as possible, but supply overmet demand. The assembly member for that part of the Upper East Side, Assembly Member Rebecca Seawright, worked with BOE to eventually open up a second location at Marymount College for the last few days of the early voting period. So that kind of prompted us to think, well, this issue wasn't just an issue that occurred in the Upper East Side. I mean, there were reports all over the city. There were some locations that were underused, some that were over capacity. So wouldn't it be great if we could help, BOE identify locations that could be used that aren't necessarily being used? And the best people to help us identify these locations are those of you in the community, because you may know of locations, or you may be aware of locations that were used in the past that aren't being used now, or any combination. And to have a list, make sure that the list complies with all of the prerequisites that the BOE has, and then have that list available and submit it to the BOE. So that way they have a running list and to say, look, in Community Board 6, there are 3 locations that could potentially be alternates or overflow locations if needed. So we're going to introduce legislation to make these types of working groups, mandatory across the city, so that each community council district, will have one, or the boroughs will have one, however that ultimately comes to be. The thought is that community input in these types of situations is invaluable. We absolutely need more of it. And BOE, to their credit, they're a relatively small agency handling a very, very large responsibility. So working in tandem with them and giving them that support is really what we hope to do. So we put out the request during I want to say November's borough board meeting. A few people were very passionate about it, including your CB6 chair, Kyle, who joined us in our first meeting in December. And we kind of put together, an early plan to kind of move forward. So our next meeting is coming up this Thursday. The Commissioner Townsend will be a special guest who will be making sure that we're, maintaining the criteria that's necessary. So she's offered to help out. And essentially the goal is to just have, a running list to help in case we have a situation again like this. As of right now, I'm looking at the CFB's website. There are 416 open accounts for the 2021 primary. That's almost 100 more than there were for 2017. So, and that number could grow. So we expect there to be high turnout for a municipal election, given the fact that we have so many seats that are being contested. The mayor, the comptroller, almost every borough presidency is being contested. So there will be a need for it. So we hope to have, a test of, the fact that community input can work in this kind of process. So that's really what I wanted to talk about. I really couldn't touch on anything else because I think that like I said, we got a master class on the other issues. So I wouldn't even care to add anything to that discussion. I think it was well covered. But with that, I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Wilfredo. I see Jim Collins has his hand up.
I've thought for a while that requiring voters to go vote in their own ED is kind of an anachronism, given the technology available. If someone's working late, let's say, and can't make it to the polls, wouldn't it be more appropriate for them to just go to the nearest polling place? And certainly we have the data power to allocate their vote to the proper district, and particularly with the voting book that Ms. Doran mentioned, it would seem to me that that's much more appropriate. And also trying to fit everyone through a certain throughput in such a certain districts that are more heavily concentrated. Just go over, go another few blocks outside your own AD or ED and vote there. And then match them up as part of the voting process electronically.
Yeah, Jim, that would be amazing, and we would be 100% on board. There are limitations to what can be done. If Commissioner Townsend wants to talk about that piece of it, because I know she's probably more well versed on the rules around.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So what you're talking about is what we would call like all county voting, essentially, and it's definitely something it's on our radar, but we're not quite there yet in terms of being able to implement that. Obviously, it does require some change regarding I'm forgetting the word that I'm looking for, but like in terms of technology, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that I'm a big fan of that, but one, I would say we have a number of reforms that also have to be implemented. So I'm a fan of let's not try to change everything all at the same time. I don't think that that's necessarily the best way to do business. And also, as Wilfredo mentioned, we are a small agency. There are only there's a finite number of people to implement this, and our workers they work very, very hard. And so we try to be measured in terms of the number of changes that we throw at them at any one given time. It's a lot to implement. That said, I am in favor of all county voting. I favor a more graduated approach, meaning that before we were to move to something citywide, so let's say you live in Manhattan, but you work in Queens, and you want to vote in Queens because it's more convenient for you and you want to do it after work. What I personally would like to see first is that if you live in Manhattan, you can vote anywhere in Manhattan. First, as a first step, we get that under our belts, we refine the process, and then we can expand it city-wide. That's how I would like to see it roll out. I think that would be a smarter way to do it. That would sort of be my preference for how we should roll that out.
Okay, I understand. It is a project.
But a good, I think a good and important one. And also just keep in mind, it would also, I think my speculation, just throwing this out there, that it would also heavily change the way that we maybe allocate sites and move things around, just knowing that we have central business corridors around the city. And if we have all county voting, does that mean that people are going to opt to vote in Midtown where they work, assuming, let's just pretend like the COVID doesn't exist and we're in a normal world. I think we would probably have to add a lot of sites to Midtown and a lot of sites to downtown, and maybe a lot of sites to downtown Brooklyn if people decide that they want to vote maybe near their office or near, where they're doing errands, as opposed to voting near their home. And so part of doing a measured approach is you don't know how people are going to behave differently if that opportunity is afforded to them. So I think, again, taking it in phases is a smarter way to do that.
Yeah, it just seems a bit of an anachronism to me. And I see Ms. Doran had some question, but she's muted.
Oh, actually, Mr. Collins, I wanted to make a comment that I think I'm not sure that many folks are aware, but election law was amended in the not too distant past. Section 3-500 allows for alternative staffing of poll sites on election day, which means we don't have to have that election district model where you go into your poll site and maybe there's a line of 50 people at one election district and there's there's one person at another. We could have the model for election day that we have at early voting, which I think most voters liked, any line, any time. You walk in to vote early and you don't have to find your election district. The election law allows the New York City Board of Elections to do that. And I think that it's not necessarily the countywide voting that Commissioner Townsend was talking about, but it would make, I believe, voting on election day a little bit more like the experience of early voting, hopefully without all those crowds of people, right, waiting outside. But I think that it would better serve the voters, and that's what we're all about, is serving the voters better. So take a look at it. It's not complicated. It's section 3-500 of the election law, and it's the way poll sites are set up in many jurisdictions outside of New York City. And ask the other commissioners, Commissioner Townsend, why are we clinging to the election district model? What can't we do this other thing?
I think I actually don't know. I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think that there are other commissioners who would be open to it. So it is definitely something
good.
that you know, I want to continue to have the conversation on. But I think over the last year or so, we've been very much in the mode of like, let's get early voting to work really well before we add something new. And let's, you know, and then what we didn't expect to have to do is to really ramp up absentee voting and also having to educate people. We could just have a huge number of people who've never thought about voting by absentee before, and we had to educate them about how to do that. And now we're going to have ranked choice voting, so we have to educate people about how to do that as well. So I'm of the, you know, sort of one thing at a time, but I do think that we'll ultimately get there.
This doesn't allow, Ms. Doran, the thing you talked about doesn't allow you to cross AD assembly districts, does it? Or
wait, I'm sorry.
No, but it modifies the poll site setup so that it will look more like the early voting setup, which I think if any of you on this panel, on this screen took advantage of, I think you would say that it's a better experience than voting on a crowded election day.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I see questions from panelists.
My hand got raised accidentally as I was typing in the chat. I don't see any other questions. Brendan, do you?
I do not see any other questions either.
I mean, I would add to just, you know, Jim's suggestion. I think that in my area, I've noticed that a lot of people do get confused because there are multiple, you know, polling sites on election day that are within, you know, a few blocks of each other. And somebody who might be living across the street from one actually is assigned to one that's a few blocks away, and people show up. I've been a poll worker, and that happens quite often. So even within an assembly district, being able to go vote wherever is a good idea. So thanks, Kate, for mentioning that that's possible. Any questions from the public?
I do not see any.
Okay, well, I would like to thank Wilfredo and Kate and Tiffany for joining us today and giving us such great information on things that we should think about, but also just things that are informed us to be more educated on how voting is working and all the laws that have recently come up at the state level. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to speak to your group.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
So there is no chair's report. You know, Rick is not here and we didn't have anything really to discuss. But if there's any old or new business that anyone would like to bring up.
Fantastic. I'm going to be able to see the Ohio State Alabama game.
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
Yeah, that's great. Well, yes. Did I hear a second to the motion to adjourn?
Second.
Second.
Okay, so then we are adjourned. And thank
Go
you.
Buckeyes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank